Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Chaucer's Books virtual author discussion with author A. Natasha Joukovsky. My name is Greg Filson, and I'm an assistant manager at Chaucer's Books, a 47-year-old independent bookstore located in Santa Barbara, California. To purchase tonight's book, browse other books, or check out other upcoming events, please go to our website, chaucersbooks.com. Tonight's event is simulcasted on and being recorded for our YouTube channel and will be available to view after program's completion. While our guests and I are the only ones seeing and heard in this webinar, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. YouTubers can type their functions directly into the chat. So let's begin. Tonight, Chaucer's Books welcomes A. Natasha Joukovsky, the author of The Portrait of a Mirror, published by Overlook Press, Abram Book. Natasha, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
So I wanted to start off because I've read about your background and everything, but I wanted to give people, what kind of got you here in your background. Where'd you grow up, and where'd you go to school, and what kind of brought you to this point about having your debut novel, Portrait of a Mirror?
Yeah. So I grew up in State College, Pennsylvania, until I went to boarding school, like Wes and Vivian do in the novel. The Sill School in The Portrait of a Mirror is definitely based on my time at boarding school. I went to the University of Virginia for undergrad and worked in big museums after, having majored in literature. So it's where I, read a lot of the novels and criticism that went into, all the allusions in the book. And then I worked in big museums for about 5 years, the Philadelphia Museum of Art in Philadelphia and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. While I was at the Met, I went to business school at New York University at Stern School of Business, and transitioned into a career in management consulting. So I mean, what happens in this novel and all of the landscapes are very much drawn from my life. And, of course it's fiction, but I tried to use the worlds that I, have known.
And that makes sense. And having that background, and then reading this book where the art world is such a big display, and the Northeast, and you grew up in Pennsylvania, and I did too. And I think that's sort of funny is now I live in California, and I felt like I've always had this weird fascination with the Northeast and this pretentious outlook, with whether it's American Psycho, which I think is where that kind of started for me. I was a huge Bret Easton Ellis fan from the movie first, and then I read the book. And I feel like I hope we take this the right way. It's like the writing reminds me of that, both the movie and the book, where it's this tongue in cheek of we're better than the rest of society. And we don't even care if people know that we feel this way. And that's what that felt like. And when I read this, and what stood out to me. So what are your thoughts on that Northeast elitism being, I feel that it's a niche group. It's maybe not for everyone, but when people are in it, it's such a clique.
Yeah. I mean, American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis, is one of the books that is in my first appendix on anxieties of influence. I love that novel. There's lots of, I actually envisioned the four main characters, Wes, Diana, Vivian, and Dale, as the famous scene in American Psycho, most famous scene, I think maybe the business card scene, where
Yes.
Everybody is comparing their business cards. And I kind of envisioned these four characters like Bret Easton Ellis's business cards in that scene, where nothing, and I think it's a line in the novel, nothing illuminates difference quite like homogeneity. So when things are very, very similar, you notice the differences more, and those differences often become more important. And that's, I think, particularly true with, you call it pretentious, right? The pretentious 1% New York elite society, right? The the gradations between people are very, very small. These are often very similar people who, talking with them can be like talking to a mirror sometimes. And I wanted to illustrate those differences through their similarities. And so that book was hugely inspirational for me. And there's cheeky references too, like the Sill School, the boarding school is called the Sill School in the novel. And the cool girl group is called the Cillian Rails, and Cillian Rail is the
Yes.
name of the font. So there's that's a nice little Easter egg. But yeah, no, I think that there's a huge amount of glamour, right? When glamour requires distance, and so I think it's much easier for that glamour to take hold potentially when you're not in New York and not in that world. I majorly glamorized New York when I was growing up. It was, the city where I knew I wanted to live my whole life. And actually living there was not as much fun as I thought it would be.
Well, it's like the phrase is distance and good lighting. I think that's like one of those things too. And that's what you kind of portray in this book is you're viewing it from the outside and seeing these people's lives, or, we think it's perfect. And then the more you dig in, the perfection is very much not there. And that is where it kind of leads me to Gossip Girl. Mm-hmm. And it's everyone is the same character in Gossip Girl. It doesn't matter whether it was a character that was rich or poor. They all kind of were after that same thing. And it was always, Blair was always jealous of Serena, and they're literally the same person. They're just trying to counter. And that's how I felt with the, Diane, they're the same person. And it's weird to me that and the way it ends up is so perfect where, the two people should be, but it didn't matter how they ended up. It didn't matter what works with this book. And, were you thinking about that when you're writing this book, that the relation to Gossip Girl, or, what is your fascination? Are you a fan of Gossip Girl? Number one, I guess. And then did you have kind of that thought while you're writing this? This has a Gossip Girl kind of appeal to it, because for me, it really does.
I am a big fan of Gossip Girl. I actually just wrote an essay about it on my Substack, and the new Gossip Girl versus the old one, with a little bit of flavor of portrait in there too. And I think the thing that really links them, I only recently got the vocabulary to describe this, is that all three are really, really concerned with this idea of mimetic desire that comes out of Renee Girard's thinking, and was recently highlighted by Luke Burgess in his book that came out the same day as mine, Wanting. So I've been like trying to learn all about this recently, because it's one of those things that I feel like I subconsciously was trying to learn everything about, just without the words to express it. And I think that that's really what I wasn't thinking of Gossip Girl specifically while I wrote the book. I was much more thinking of, the great novels of the 19th century that are, the portrait, like I was thinking of Portrait of a Lady and Anna Karenina and Moby Dick. And that's more what was in my mind. But in retrospect, absolutely, there's tons of parallels. I mean, probably subconsciously it was inspiring me. And, I think that they really, really share, they're at both novels. I should say in my novel and in both Gossip Girl television shows, like the foundation and the tension of the arc of the story arc is a mimetic rivalry. Serena and Blair's mimetic rivalry is what anchors the original Gossip Girl. They're, mirroring it basically identically in the new one with Julian and Zoya. And, in my book, all four characters are basically entrapped in mimetic rivalries with each other. So I was trying to push kind of this without knowing the word for it. I was trying to push this idea of mimetic rivalry and Mimetic Desire, with the, the idea of recursion, which features really, really prominently in the novel.
Yeah.
So that, it's not just like one close mimetic rivalry. And of course, there's more in Gossip Girl too. But I was really, really thinking about kind of the square architecture and everybody looking at everybody in a way where, it would be akin to the central trope of the novel, which is, what it's like to be standing in between two parallel mirrors, and you get this infinite recursion effect, where, it is complex and interesting, but also, the more it trends toward infinity, we lose our ability to comprehend it, and it kind of descends into chaos. So, I guess I was trying to push what I think is the central premise of Gossip Girl, even farther.
Yeah, I think you did it beautifully. I really do. It's just, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but I think there was a part, and I have mentioned it to you, where I hit this part in the book where I'm like, this is where I thought it was Gossip Girl, and I think this is a good part where maybe you want to step in and read
Sure.
the beginning of chapter 8, where I actually read it and I had to just tell everybody, please read this, because I thought it was just so well done.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, like you said, this is the beginning of chapter 8. It's about a quarter of the way into the book. I don't really think there's much preface you need to know to jump in. It is page 69. So we were chatting before the program that I did a little piece on this, because page 69 is Marshall McLuhan's famous test about, if you like page 69, you're going to like the book. So I think if I read this and you like it, you'll probably like the book. In retrospect, Vivian would develop a clear explanation to herself as to why it happened. How many, many years of resisting what she wanted to do in favor of what she wanted to have done had, far from building up a tolerance, reached some kind of maximum capacity in her, some outer bound limit to human restraint. It wasn't a departure from her character, she came to believe, but rather an inevitability precisely because of her character. Her oversaturation in the present perfect tense had left her perversely, cruelly vulnerable in the face of a perfect present. And Julian hadn't helped. Still-mill gossip notwithstanding, Vivian had never really pictured Wesley Range as a tech CEO. Her impression of him was built on the kind of emotional truth impervious to fact, and she could only conceive of his adulthood as the creative class ideal, an endless extension of ultra-privileged adolescence, of ambiguous job but definitive lifestyle. He'd be perpetually at the epicenter of the universe, conspicuously at leisure whatever the season. Summers in Nantucket that rounded into a Telluride September, autumnal New England culminating in a traditional Connecticut Christmas before skiing in Adelboden or Chamonix. A real vacation in January or February, St. Bart's or Nevis, something remote and lush and invariably involving a yacht. There'd be at least one extended, more exotic self-discovery sort of sojourn each year, Rajasthan, Machu Picchu, Marrakesh. By Vivian's intuitive calendrical expectations, West should have been in Cannes this week. Stop there. It's the whole page.
I just love that. I think what I love about it is just this. It is what I talked about earlier with that pretension of like, we just have to get away from all this, even though seemingly their lives are perfect. And that's what they're trying to portray. But the idea is like, we're a quarter way through, and obviously something has to happen. Something has to change the way they go. And my question is, when you were writing this, and like, we said before we talked, is you didn't know this was going to be page 69.
No.
And, and it just happened to be that, and I have read that where you had the theory 16, page 69. I'm like, well, this is amazing. And so when you write that and you go back and reread it, did you think something special was there
on that page versus any other? I mean,
yeah, or
honestly,
just that
no.
writing?
Honestly,
Okay.
no. I mean, I labored over every sentence in this novel. I mean, there's sentences that came more easily than others, but there's sentences that I spent whole days on. And I mean, it took me a very, very long time to write this book. And so I really wanted the book to withstand flipping to literally any page and at a sentence level, you would get that, you would get a really good sense of the book, right? From one page, because to me, the sentence level was kind of the most important thing for me in the novel. It's what I ultimately read for. I can enjoy a novel about almost anything if the sentences are really good. And that's what I was trying to do. I mean, obviously I wanted to connect them into a compelling plot too. And I do think the book has a plot. Some people will probably disagree, or it doesn't have enough for some people. It's definitely character driven, but look, I didn't think that this page was more special or, better than any other.
And I totally get that. And I was a journalist for a few years. I went to school for journalism. I mean, I get that too, where it's like you write something and you reread it and you read it and you don't think about it in the moment. And someone tells you something, you're like, well, I didn't think about this at the time. And it's just funny how you did the whole, the page 69 or, retrospect. And what I thought was also that is just one selection for me. I could pick anything. But the thing that I really thought was like this nice, like break in the book was the overheard uptown #overheard uptown. I really, really enjoyed that. And I thought that was like a good experiment to do with something that you don't see enough. And I don't know if you ever read the book Single Ladies.
I have. I love the book Single Ladies.
Okay. So that's what I immediately thought of. And I thought that was like, that's sort of funny. Like there's a whole book in this, and then I don't know if you were influenced by that to put there, because there's the male, the passages like that. But this was very
I'm thinking of a different book. I'm thinking of Hey Ladies.
Or Hey Ladies, that's it. I'm sorry.
Are we thinking of the same book?
We're thinking the same book. Hey Ladies. I was thinking, sorry, got Beyonce stuck in my head there for a second. Hey Ladies. Yeah, where it's just, we're thinking the same book.
But it's all like a modern epistolary wedding
and
novel.
It's just the most stressful but hilarious book about, the wedding, going on. And
I didn't read that book until after I had finished
that's so
drafting
funny.
it. But a friend of mine from college sent that to me, and she's like, you have to read this. And I thought it was hilarious. I wasn't thinking of it in particular with Overheard Uptown, but you mentioned that it was like a nice break. And I will say I did very, very intentionally put in those, alternative format chapters, one being the emails, the text messages, the call logs, the Instagram, which is the Overheard Uptown account, kind of a parody of, Overheard New York and et cetera. And I did intentionally intersperse those where I thought the reader might need a little break from my prose, because it's admittedly dense and, it's admittedly over the top. Not everyone connects with this, but I was really pushing it because of the narcissist theme. And I was trying to write a novel where the language was kind of in love with itself. And it's part of the joke of the book is, the over the topness of the language. But I did assume that most readers would need a break, which is also why the alternative format chapters are weighted toward the beginning. Like I figured that people would build up a tolerance for it as they went on, and I'd need fewer toward the end.
And what I thought about it was that the Google yourself kind of thing. And that's because obviously this book is about narcissism, and the sense of that's kind of what you're doing in this sense, where like you're reading all these things and you're just kind of like looking over the passages of that, and you're going back and you're kind of reflecting on what you just read. Yeah. And you're looking back and you feel like these people are totally Googling themselves. They're totally seeing if other people are tagging them in anything. It's such a book of this culture. And you and I were talking about how it's, this type of atmosphere with this, area or whatever is outdated for some reason. I don't get it. Because what I really, really enjoyed about this, and it was a release from the heavy books that I feel like everybody is just putting out like everything has to be the most important thing all the time. I love this book because it isn't that. It's everything in their lives is the most important thing at all times, but of course it is just like funny to us. And, do you have any thoughts on that, on everything having to be very, very heavy, but this was not that?
I think that people do not approach frivolity with enough seriousness, and they approach serious topics with too much frivolity. Like it's some of the things that our culture talks about as being superficial, selfies, um, social media, are like, they are so deeply complex and driving the way that we're all experiencing the world, and built on meeting and or pretending to meet, oftentimes, like really really fundamental human desires. Like I've talked about this, but I think the selfie is basically an attempted solution to the problem of mortality, basically. Like, it's allowing us to capture our image in a malleable and uh you know in a malleable way that we can then choose how we're remembered. And, like, I mean, it's almost a form of like self eulogy
Mm-hmm.
in life. And I don't know if you've had any friends that died, but like their social medias are still there. It's really kind of
It's
creepy.
weird.
There are digital afterlife companies. Like, it's a form of legacy building, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And in some ways, in that way, it's either replaced or is a form of art, right? Because art has been the traditional, if you're not religious, art has been kind of the traditional way to try and cement your immortality. James Joyce, famous quote that he was going to keep the professors busy for centuries arguing over what he meant, and that's the only way to ensure your immortality. I think we're looking for new ways, and a lot of these seemingly superficial things are actually really really deep and complex. And this, the depth of superficiality is definitely a theme in the book. And I think to your love of Gossip Girl, I think that shows like that often are so Moorish and capture the public's attention so effectively because in spite of their frivolity, they're like really zeroing in on something that on something profound in many cases.
Yeah, and I guess the reason why I kind of wanted this is sometimes when you see people that are out of touch, that's where you kind of think about things and more than if you're just thrown if it's just thrown at your face as if this is a problem and here's everything all you need to know. But if you see the people there like looking at you know just wedding invitations, let's say that is just something that's not really that super important, but they look at it as the most important thing ever. It's like, wow, like they literally have no problems, and there's so many actual problems out there. And that's kind of the way I
Yeah.
was like looking at this book in like in a positive way, is like, boy, these people are like they seem like they have it made, but then they don't, and they're always looking for something different. And the reason why they're looking for something different is because they don't have the problems that are actually in the world.
Well, I mean,
And
there's hedonic adaptation going on too,
mm-hmm.
right? Like, whatever your circumstances are, that's why nobody's ever happy. If I mean, obviously there's meditation, there's ways to try and circumvent that, but I mean, it all comes back to how we want and how we're hardwired as human beings to desire things. And it's generally, I mean, it's through models, and this goes back to the idea of mimetic desire. And we're constantly changing things because we have multiple models, not just one, and our models change. And every time our models change, the things we want, we thought we wanted, we maybe didn't. And the things that we never heard of, we suddenly want. So we're constantly chasing our tails in a way. And social media exacerbates it. Like completely unregulated capitalism exacerbates it. And I think these are a lot of the heavy ideas that come up in kind of heavy fiction books. But to me, I certainly think that literature can change things, but I also think that there's a danger in conflating literary progress with actual political progress. And sometimes we're attracted to all these heavy books, thinking that reading these things are going to make the world better, and maybe yes, maybe no.
Right, because you still have to act.
Right.
I think that's one of those things that people kind of forget about. You can read all you want, and these books can be published all they want, but if nobody's actually doing anything, then what are we actually? You're not learning anything. You have it on your shelf, and it looks like something, but are you really doing anything? I think that's why books like this, and they do actually do something in a sense of giving people this. In the way it's like this outlet, but then it brings you back. Like you feel like you're getting away, and then you actually realize, oh, there is more than just this great life in New York City that is presumably lived. We'll bring it back down to not as important.
Well, let me say one more thing, because I think a lot of it is really you hinted at this. I think a lot of it really is performative, and people for whatever reason, like novels are very serious, right? And so people feel like they should be learning something, and novels should be hard. Like no, novels are fun. Like novels should be fun. Like you said, they can delight just as much as television. There's no inherent reason why a novel, because of its form and because it's an older form, should be more serious.
Great segue. Literally went exactly where I wanted to go.
Okay.
So this book is a lot of fun. I know we went like super deep there, but I really thought this book was a lot of fun. It has a sort of actually a pretty depressing ending. Not to but it's just the ending. It hits you, and it hits you kind of hard and fast, which I like. I want people to be devastated when they read. I read it twice just to make sure I was actually rightly devastated. So, but the fun thing about it is you have the four main characters, and maybe one of them is your favorite characters. I have a favorite. Oh no, my favorite character is Julian. Okay, that's my favorite character in the book. Okay, so I just wanted to, and there's something about him because he's not, a lot of times everyone's favorite character is the voice of reason. He's not. He's there, and he's kind of like the voice of unreason constantly. He's the voice of chaos, which I think is a lot of fun. And when you're writing that, what is that like to write a character like that? It is just so against the mold of probably anyone that reads this book. If I would almost guess 90% of the people are going to think he's the best character in this, and probably, the most fun going forward if this becomes anything else. Oh, absolutely. Well, actually writing Julian was the easiest character to write because he is 100% without exaggeration based on my late friend, Evan Thomas, to whom the book is dedicated. And I mean, some of the lines that the character says in the novel are things that Evan said in real life. I really tried to be 100% faithful. And I guess my craft insight here, I guess, would be that only unbelievable people make good, believable characters. And if you're gonna just wholesale write a real person into fiction, they better be totally out there in real life. Otherwise, you're better off, making a lot of stuff up. Every other character in the novel is either a composite or just purely fictionalized. I think even purely fictionalized, I'm referencing something from somewhere, even if it's subconscious, right? Right. But yeah, no, he came very naturally. I started writing down things he said at brunch in 2011. So. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny because, when he initially comes on, I just remember saying, well, this guy's going to be my favorite. No matter what happens going forward, he's going to be my favorite character. And he just keeps hitting. I think that's going to be something that's a little tough too, because like you said, it was, based off a friend of yours where you have to make sure that he keeps going and he never stops. He's 100 the entire way, which there is one time in the book when he breaks the character of himself. Yeah, and that threw me. I actually like I remember rereading that passage and being like, wait a second. And then you're like, oh, but I get it. I understand why, but it is that part where he breaks it a little bit, but then
But then
he comes back.
he's right back. He's right
He's
back.
right
But
back.
that's also mirroring life too. There were moments in real life as well where, he would briefly break, his persona. But he was a contrarian through and through and through and through. And yeah, I think I always thought that I was shocked that he never ended up on reality television. And as soon as I met him, practically, I thought it was like meeting a character in a novel. I've gotten very, very kind notes from some of his other close friends and his mother, that it's him.
Yeah, so what a tribute. I mean, that is great. And it's when I was reading this and I thought of him as someone that would be on like The Real World, back in the 90s or something like that too. You just have this feeling but he's just the guy that's like off in the corner but has the greatest, whatever like one-liners every single time. And that's how I portrayed him.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I mean,
break.
Talking to him was like talking to a modern day Oscar Wilde, who's so aphoristic.
Oh, wow.
You know what I'm saying? Like he's just so razor sharp. But one of the smartest people I've ever met.
And that's what he feels like when you're reading this. You're just, when he comes along, it's just, oh, here comes something really funny and really sharp. And just kind of, it was always so funny the way the other characters would react to him too.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciated that. I thought that was just a really nice touch. And
that was really important to me. It was like that. I mean, he does, for as much as I, wanted to do this tribute to him in fiction, I like the character Julian serves a very designated literary function in being a foil to the other four main characters. Someone who's, they have these like tiny shards and shaves of differentiation, whereas he's just so radically different. It throws them into relief. Without, usually the way this is done in books about this set is having a single poor character, the scholarship kid at boarding school, the, right. You have, somebody who's kind of like an outsider. I had an idea that this book would be better for really everyone to be insiders in it. And,
and he's like an insider. That's that's the funny thing about it. Is I think that's what made it better is, I think if it was an outsider, it would have been too cliche for sure. He's just so in it. He has no idea what else is going on in the world except what's in Julian's world, which is so great and so funny and so well done. It just, like I said, I think this book is just a real joy to read. And he is probably the biggest reason, and the other four characters have their thing where they're all just kind of, they're all in love with themselves for whatever reason. But, the actual Julian's actually more in love with himself more than anyone. And he's fine with that. Like he does not care. He's just like, this is where I need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he definitely has some it's not that he doesn't have models, right? Like they're just really, really different than most people's models in his, socioeconomic segment. His models are like the British Guard and like police officers and like really, really strange, unusual folks to live up to for, someone coming from this world.
I almost thought in a way, because everyone's, they're trying to find their perfect match. They're trying to find, and he was almost the most realistic because he's like, I don't really know if that's out there because I've already found it. And that's what I thought was really cool with the theme of this book and everything. And so and you and I have talked, before this, and we mentioned Donna Tartt and Bret Easton Ellis, and obviously going back, and you mentioned Oscar Wilde, and I think this is a really funny way where you talked about the selfie, and selfie is kind of the portrait of Dorian. You take your best picture and you go back on that, and I know that being an influence on things like this, and what what other influences did you have, beyond this? And my actual key question is, I think it's always tough to have your influence and you have a certain writer or, actor, whatever you like, but make it your own. Because while I read this and I felt the influence from everything, it is your writing style. This doesn't actually sound like the writing is not Bret Easton Ellis. It's not Donna Tartt. It's not Oscar Wilde. It is just specifically yours. So how are you able to take your influences and then actually make it your own?
Well, if you steal a little bit from everyone, it's not plagiarism, right?
There you go.
And I think that's really how I think tradition and everyone has models. I think if you know who they are and try and use them effectively, that can oftentimes work better. For me, I was looking at a broad base of writers from, Jane Austen, George Eliot, Herman Melville, Oscar Wilde, James Joyce, and I was stealing from kind of everyone. I would say that if you're looking for the 2 or 3, authors that have really influenced me most, it would be Jane Austen, who my father started reading me her books when I was 10, and she's like the voice of my conscience at this point. And then I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Ulysses and The Wasteland as the twin pillars of modernist poetry and prose that kind of became achieved eminence by embracing a synthetic aesthetic. They each stole a line from everyone, right? And even though they had obviously more pervasive influences as well, particularly Joyce with Homer, but I was trying to marry the 19th century psychological novel, Jane Austen, Henry James, later Edith Wharton, kind of prose and accessibility with the deep, elusive, patchwork of an Eliot or a Joyce. So I wanted all of the Easter eggs to be so deeply embedded that if you got them, you would experience an additional kind of layer of glee, right? But that if you didn't see them, you wouldn't see that you were missing something, if that makes sense. So I wanted the book to be able to exist on those 2 levels, because as much as I, love Joyce, I think that his bugaboo is accessibility. And I wanted the book to be accessible.
Yeah, and I find it very accessible. And when I think when people think about accessibility, I thought this very early on with this book, is this is a TV series or a movie. Something I thought, I was like, wow. And I'm casting people in my head immediately.
Who do you think? Tell me who you want to cast.
Well, Florence Pugh has to be in this. I don't it's just, everyone else, I'm I could go a lot of different ways, but Florence Pugh,
I think she'd be an amazing Diana.
Diana, it's there was a point where I was actually using her voice from Little Women in my head as Diana. And I'm this is kind of freaking me out. And so that's number one. But is there any talk about this being a TV series or a movie? If you can share that, I don't know if you can or not, but I really, and I mean this in this is so, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how good it would be.
Thank you so much for saying that. I wrote the novel to be cinematic. I wrote about this a little bit in when I did the something on a little piece on the playlist for the Large Hearted Boy blog that a lot of authors do a playlist for. But I had a movie going on in my mind that I felt like I was transcribing with the book. I've always hoped that it would become either a film or a TV show. There's nothing definite going on yet, but I'm having creative conversations with people. It's very exciting. hopefully,
Yeah.
the latest thinking is hopefully a limited series. I, again, there's not much definite that I can say other than that
Sure.
I have an agent, we're talking to people, and, there are definitely people that agree. So, hopefully, Hollywood is tough and, a long process and oftentimes, up to a lot of chance. So who knows what'll happen, but I certainly hope so. And Florence Pugh, if you're watching.
Yeah, I just because I love her and everything, and
Yeah.
and she would totally fit this mold. And I think another thing too with why I say this too is when you say you're writing the cinematic experience, but there is something about watching an actor really go above, really get into it. And if you've seen like the Marriage Story, where Adam Driver is just so a big character in that movie, and that's kind of what I thought about, whether he would be in this or not. There's that Adam Driver effect where he kind of leaps off the screen, and I can see that with these characters in this book where people just kind of leap at you in the book. And there were some times, and I flew through this. I couldn't. It was hard. Like I actually put it down intentionally because I was like, I don't want to finish this because when it's done, I'm done with it, and I don't want to be done with this. But I like the characters just flew off the screen or off the book for me, that I was like, I could imagine them being on the screen and just like, wow. And I could totally imagine, however long down the road where, you see the sticker and people are like, wow, this book, and I'm watching it on whatever, or the movie. And there's this little bit of satisfaction that I have with this where it's like, well, I was super in on this early. And because, and I will say this is I tend to go after books that are maybe a little different because this was, it was so funny. I saw the cover and I've always loved the painting, but what drove me to it is, the little Instagram thing.
Of course.
I'm like, well, there has to be something that I like about this immediately because I like the tongue in cheekness. So I just like read the first couple of lines and I look at a couple of people and I'm like, well, I'm going to like this book. I don't know how much I'm going to like it, but I'm definitely going to end up liking this book based purely on like the flap. And I started reading it that day during my break. And I said, I'm going to love this book. I said that. I go, but this is definitely going to be, I told everyone, like, this is definitely going to be like a show. There's no, if there's anything I could personally do, which there isn't, but if there's anything I could do, I would love to make this. And I know I'm like going hard, but I haven't had a book like hit me this well in a really long time because it is different. Everything I've been reading is definitely heavy. And I think that I know you said we don't do things like this. This did remind me of The Secret History after you recommended The Secret History to me, and I went back and just in a different sense. And I think I hope that this is a trend that goes forward. I think that's why I want it to be something too, is, bigger than, where people see more of it, because I kind of like that trend. And I want this to be maybe the beginning of a new trend. And what are your thoughts on maybe that, not necessarily because, maybe your book does it, but just, maybe we start something new where we take something in a direction where things can still be important, but they don't have to be slapped in your face importance.
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably a lot of that is stemming from the fact that I was so divorced from, I guess, what we'd call the literary community while I was writing this. I don't have an MFA. I've never taken a writing class. I've just, read a lot of old books and classics. And I think there's backlash against the classics. And I guess I feel that oftentimes the baby's getting thrown out with the bathwater, that there's no reason why we can't embrace books other than the classics and like a yes and kind of thing. Because I like books that, recent books too. And I've been actually surprised because I wasn't reading much contemporary fiction until I finished my book, because I didn't want to be swayed by it. I had this vision and I wanted to finish it before I started reading a bunch of contemporary books. And I've actually been surprised how many I've liked.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, there are some just like amazing books being written right now. For instance, I will say Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. has gotten a ton of attention, so
Yeah.
well deserved. What I think is really interesting about that book is, yes, she's writing about in kind of an underrepresented historically group, but the book itself is exceedingly traditional. Like, this is Detransition Baby is straight out of like Madame Bovary, Anna Karenina. Like, this is a domestic bourgeois novel. I mean, it is so deeply traditional. And I mean that as like the highest compliment. So I think that it's happening in pockets for sure. But like, I think that maybe it's hard for people when a book is both traditional and about rich white people, which, I mean, I get it. Fair enough.
Oh, and we actually have a question from the audience. So it's from TT, and the response: I can't wait to read this book. How many drafts did you go through, and how long was the whole process? Also, what is your writing routine?
Okay. All right. This is like a don't do what I did kind of thing, I guess. But I am, if there are two types of writers, word vomiters and diamond polishers. Word vomiters like get everything on the page and then revise and revise and revise and revise to make it better. And diamond polishers who like can't go from one sentence to the next until the sentence is perfect. I am a diamond polisher in the extreme. So it took me about 4 or 5 years to get to a first draft of the novel. But from when I had the time to from the point when I finished the first draft, I had an agent in like less than 2 months, and a book deal a few months later. So it and my agent did a couple rounds of pretty surgical revisions with me. My editor did really only one substantive round of again pretty surgical revisions. The book hasn't changed that much. I mean, in an 80,000 word book, only about 5,000 words are different from my very first draft. So I kind of just sat down and wrote it linearly, start to finish, knowing knowing what I wanted to do on a high level, but also leaving kind of room to figure some things out as I went.
Yeah, and just speaking on that process, is there anything in the works? Do you have something you're thinking about following up with? And I don't know if we can expect a timeline or anything on it.
I mean, we can't expect a timeline. I'm like the slowest writer in the world. I mean, this goes with the I really, it's a problem. I'm very slow, and I still work in corporate America.
Right.
I'm still in the consulting world, albeit on the corporate side. So I have better work-life balance now. But I have two things in the works. I have been working on a series of essays on the subject of delusions of grandeur. The first one was published in The Common in February. And those are kind of, personal essays. I can only write things that are really out of style, like personal essays at an all-time low. What do I want to do? I want to write personal essays. I mean, the new novel that I'm working on, which is about probability in basketball, I started actually like over a year ago. Probability in basketball. Yeah, exactly.
Probability. So we're best friends now, Natasha. I'm just gonna tell you right now, you and I are best friends after this. The probability in basketball, this is like literally my life. I cannot believe that we're talking. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's about it's about rarity and March Madness and some stuff. But I had originally planned for the second novel to be set in the near future, but that near future did not involve COVID-19. So I've had to, it like really, really derailed me from working on it at all. So I've been writing these personal essays, which are super, super out of style instead. But when I think I've found a new path with my next book where I'm going to set it in 2019 instead of the future, and that'll be my change. So, but I only have like a little over a chapter written. Like, it's very, very early stage. So yeah, I'm taking a little
But
break.
and you deserve it, because I think this book is, worthy of people being able to hang around and have this be their first read of you. And I'm looking forward to whatever you do going forward. I was so happy to have this opportunity. I'm glad that Mike at Chaucer's was able to do this for me. I mentioned to him one night, and he was on it very quickly. And this has been my pleasure. Like I said, I've talked to you, prior to this by Instagram, but the face to face was really fun, and I hope you had a good time. I
had
know we
a
went a
great
lot.
time. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The pleasure's mine.
It was, anytime I can talk about Gossip Girl, and then somehow you just say, oh, I'm going to do probability and basketball at the very end. Now that's all I'm going to think about. So, but yeah,
I need to get writing.
just for me. So yeah, like we said, you can visit Chaucer's in Santa Barbara. If you can't, we can deliver it online, mail it to you, chaucersbooks.com. Natasha, thank you again. The Portrait of the Mirror. It's a great book. I can't recommend highly enough. So thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me.